I'm having a chat with the organist Joby Bell, and we're going to discuss his 2019 Centaur Records CD release, American Classic English. And here are the works on the CD, and then I'm gonna ask Joby about this choice of title for the CD. It's just I don't know, a little coy or something. I've been trying to figure it out, but anyway, the CD is comprised of entirely British composers and works by Alec Rowley, C. Hubert H. Parry, Frank Bridge, Haley Willen. I hope I'm pronouncing Willen properly. Am I?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, indeed.
And Basil Harwood. So we're talking mid to late 19th century, and some of these people managed to live into the, like the 50s and 60s. Do we have anybody who lives much longer than the 50s? But this is like the juicy heart of English organ music, and we're not talking necessarily the great virtuoso masterpieces, although Basil Harwood's sonata is clearly his sonata number 1 C sharp minor is clearly a virtuoso work, but just wonderful stuff, chorale tunes, and how the British create they're such tunesmiths.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Bridge I'm very interested in as well for his other music, so it was quite fun to hear this organ piece. Let's see. Let's let everybody know who Joby Bell is for just a second. Let me pull this down a little bit. University organist, professor of music, and coordinator sacred music curriculum at the Hayes School of Music at Appalachian. Did I get that right? Appalachian. Sorry. Appalachian. Got to remember Atch.
Little known fact.
Anyway, Hayes School of Music at Appalachian State University. Now I've got a complex in North Carolina. Degrees in organ performance from Appalachian State University and Rice University. I presume you got your doctorate at Rice, yeah.
Right.
And as everybody knows, okay, you've got the credentials. We're okay with that. Rice University, yeah, what a tremendous school of music. Right off the bat, let's just get started on. You smiled at me off camera when I told you that I was just a little bit trying to wrap my head around this kind of almost enigmatic title that you've chosen for the CD, American Classic English. Tell me.
That title is a bit of a double entendre, and it actually makes even more sense with another set of CDs that I'm releasing on Centaur called American Classic Vitor, which is the complete works of Charles Marie Vitor. But it's a double entendre because American Classic has become the historical moniker for the style of organ that I have recorded on. The American Classic style was epitomized primarily by Aeolian Skinner, and a bit earlier by E.M. Skinner, and to a certain degree by some of the mid 20th century works of Walter Holtkamp, and there was I mentioned E.M. Skinner. So American Classic refers to the instrument. Then the word classic, particularly in the case of the other series, of the Vitor series, refers to my fairly traditional readings of the music. I'm not trying to make any great statements with these recordings, but as it turns out, I'm allowing these organs to make their own statement. And most of the organs that I recorded on had not been recorded commercially, at least for 40-some years, if at all. And so the entire series, the whole American Classic idea in my recording output with Centaur, evolved from the great love we have for these instruments and the fact that they had not been recorded much at all. So one project led to another, and my producer and recording crew said, "Hey, why don't we go get this organ recorded, and let's go record something on this organ." And before you know it, we had recorded all English on this organ at First Baptist Church, Longview, Texas. And from there, we started recording the complete Vitor symphonies on 5 different organs around the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let me jump in for a second, because you jumped me a little bit on my next question, which was going to be to tell me about this particular organ at First Baptist Church in Longview, Texas. But let me first add this. It's no secret that I hope it's not just me alone, but I mean, organ is hard for us in the
Right.
profession because
Right.
it's a specialized area, really. And so I'm letting everybody know that no, I have no idea what I'm talking about with organ. I do a little, but
Uh,
the point is I'm going to rely on you to help us understand color and registration and
right.
all that good stuff. So
Right.
tell me about this First Baptist Church in Longview. And by the way, now I'm very clear about what you meant. I'm sure every organist would have seen that right away. American
Right.
Classic.
Right.
Yeah,
I
see,
think. I think.
I
I
went
think.
American Classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of
Now
our
I,
organ audio files, we're gonna pick up on that right away. Um, uh, all of my recordings have been born out of a certain amount of love. I was not told to make any of these recordings. I make these recordings because I love the instruments that I've recorded on, and I love the music that I chose for the instruments. Um, the whole English idea. Well, first of all, I'll tell you about the organ at First Baptist Longview. It is it's one of the great unaltered examples of the work of Mr. G. Donald Harrison, who was the president of Aeolian Skinner at the time this organ was built. He worked for Aeolian Skinner from 1936 until his death in 1956. And so this organ was 1951, which was right at the height of his output as president of the company and as the designer of these instruments. And this particular organ has not been altered in the least since 1951.
and what do
Uh,
you mean by that? People tinkering and changing and fooling
correct,
with the
correct.
mechanisms and stuff like that?
The mechanisms have been updated somewhat to bring those into the 21st century, get rid of some of the cotton covered cables, et cetera, et cetera. But the pipes have not changed. The organ sounds the same way it did in 1951. It has the very same stops. I believe it has the original keys. It has all the original console controls. All of the wood on the console is original, etc. All of the mechanisms in the organ are original. And so when I first heard this organ, I thought it was one of the most glorious sounds I'd ever heard. And of course, I hope that the recording, it allows you to get some idea of the grandeur, not only of the instrument, but also that enormous space
Space.
that it resides in. There's just no way to describe that. You just have to walk in and find out for yourself.
By the way,
Uh,
it succeeds handsomely.
yeah.
the,
Oh,
the,
great.
the
Great.
sound the sound
Hey, that's great.
engineering is just magnificent, and
Hey,
the
that's great.
instrument is huge.
That's great. That's great. Yes, it is. Um, the English connection comes from the fact that G. Donald Harrison was an Englishman. And so he emigrated to this country in 1936 to work or to join the Aeolian Skinner firm. And so I just put a couple of two and twos together and said, hey, here's one of the great works by an English organ builder working at an American company, and it's making an American statement, and I'll just record all English on this organ. And so, it's all these little connections here and there, but it just amounts to one really beautiful product, which really is born out of love. And I hate to be so clichéic about that, but I adore this instrument, and I adore the work of Aeolian Skinner. And as for the music I chose, I love these pieces. I had played a few of these in concert. Some of them work well for church, and I had discovered a couple of them in my own music files when I was just casting about for some more English music to build my repertoire with. And I came across a lot of this, and I thought, oh boy, this is all coming together in my mind quite nicely for this organ. And so I really like to think that we have matched a very nice program to this organ. With these composers and with these pieces.
And here's my, here's my impression as a professional musician, also a little out of my territory with organ repertoire. Stop me if I am misunderstanding some things. For example, the opening organ piece, Alec Rowley, Suite for Organ. I think what is it? Four
Right.
lovely
Four
movements,
Yeah.
and as I believe you say in the program book, it's not meant to be anything spectacular for the organist.
Right.
It's just these are just a beautiful suite, even for amateur musicians, as in church organists. Yeah,
Right.
have I got that
Right.
right? So,
Right.
from what I'm, looking in from the outside, you have already done a great service by giving us at the very get-go of the CD, giving organists, and there's a over a couple thousand on my database,
Right.
is entree to a piece that they can say, oh, I'll play that at church
Right.
next
Right.
Sunday, kind of thing.
Rowley truly was interested in writing accessible, playable, listenable music. I don't think he was really trying to make a great statement. To the best of my knowledge, and this is something I did not know until after this CD was released, to the best of anyone's knowledge, this is the only recording of this piece.
Ah, bingo!
That
The 2000 will be excited on
yeah.
the database. And also, what I noticed was just how, where was I? I had a little note here. Well, the suite is rich and
Yes.
beautiful and
Yes, indeed.
satisfying and accessible. I'm a little curious about when this particular, if you can remember, this particular suite might have been composed. Just so
I think it was in the 1940s.
uh,
Uh,
that explains for me
yeah.
because, as you know, I hope I'm not mistaken, but there are some very interesting moments in each of these movements
Yes.
harmonically, and the
Right.
way
Yes.
things move. And I thought, it's
Yes.
like I'm going along as a listener, happy and charming, and then it's like, what was that?
And then it maintains the style, but it does take some interesting harmonic turns every now and then.
Very
Yeah,
interesting.
it's a wonderful sort of stream of consciousness kind of composing.
That's a nice way
Through
to put it.
through composition, if you will, through composed movements, if you will.
But that surprised me quite a lot. That's why I wanted to know the year of composition. It explains a lot that he wrote it, composed this piece toward the end. It was like, but I thought to myself, oof, this is really a dandy. There are some
Yeah.
little. I use the term, I think, pinch. He kind of
Yes.
pinches you a little bit,
Little pinch,
with
yes.
little surprises and little dissonances, and then lets go. And in other words,
I tend to call those moments purple.
oh, you're a color type.
No, I just come up with the thing.
Rather than black and blue. Okay,
Correct.
I
Yeah.
All right. I always like to ask this question because organs don't just fall into the street and say,
Right.
"Here I am." What happened? What were you before? And then when did you find organ?
Me? Well, I found the organ as a kid. Growing up in the South on the East Coast, then church was a regular part of family life, and our church had a little pipe organ in it, and so I was always presented with this magnificent machine, which looked a little bit like a piano, but was so much more fascinating and a lot more mechanically invigorating, and of course it had a lot more power in its sound than the piano. So that simple mechanical fascination grew and grew and grew, and before you know it, I was teaching myself how to play and how to play the pedals as soon as I could reach them, that is. And before you knew it, I was grabbing a few lessons in high school, and then before you know it, I was double majoring in organ and piano at the undergraduate level. And then finally the piano went by the wayside, and it was organ all the way in grad school. And so here I am teaching it, and actually the one you can see behind me is the one I own. And so, I now own 3 organs. And
isn't that a bit excessive for that sounds like a
You know what? This pipe organ belonged to my graduate professor, Clyde Holloway. And so, after he died, I approached his estate about getting it because just because I wanted it. And as it turns out, I got it. But I also have a 3-manual Allen in my home. And as it turns out, learning notes on this organ is very helpful. And then I can go to the 3-manual to practice 3-manual music, or to practice punching pistons. I can practice manual changes and all kinds of other configuration things that help me out when I get out on the road. And then the third one I own is an all digital. It's built on the Hauptwerk system, which samples historic organs from all over the world, pipe for pipe, squeak for squeak, sound for sound, and you can play it on a homemade console with just a couple manuals and pedal, but the sound is all driven by software.
And you can also record in that manner.
You can record on these things. Of course, you can adjust all the various things you'd like to adjust about all the pops and squeaks you want to hear. You can adjust the tuning. You can choose the dry room or the nice resonant room. But it's really a wonderful pedagogical tool, because it means that my students can learn how to operate a Dutch organ at home, or at least in my office. They can learn how to operate a French symphonic organ from the 1800s without having to fly to Paris first. And so by the time they do make these trips later on, then they know what they're doing when they sit down at these rather different organs in Europe.
Yeah, and also you can hear, it gives them an opportunity to hear the different quality of sound, I'm sure. With these
they get to hear them, they get to operate them, and learn how, what all the gadgets do.
Now, I'd like you to kindly swear to secrecy about what you've just told me, because I'm taking a group of organists to Portugal in June. I do not want them to know that they can just roll something out on their kitchen table and not come with me.
Listen, there is no substitute for the real thing. Let's make no mistake about that. Okay. No substitute for the real thing. But at least to learn as much as you can about it before going and actually laying hands on it is of enormous value.
Huge advantage, I'm sure.
Saves a lot of times. Yeah. It really flattens out your learning curve once you get to the real thing.
Yeah, so this modern age we live in is fabulous when it is taken best advantage of.
It really is. That's cutting edge technology, and it really is life changing for anyone who can really take the time to embrace it on this side of the ocean, and then go and see the real thing.
Now I understand the wonderful purpose of this technology. That's great. But yes, I am seeing CDs now that are from these various organs, entire CD and so on. Fascinating. Right. And it's legit. Part of me says, is that cheating? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Oh no, these days, if we can keep the organ as fascinating to young people as it was to me, then we're doing fine. Yeah, and these days, it's going to take technology, in most cases. Church does what it can, but a lot of young kids don't make it to church these days. So hey, technology, or if they can go to the old restored theater in their big city or their nearest big city or their hometown, and they discover there's a pipe organ there, and it's playing for Christmas shows and for silent movies, then that fascination begins to grow.
I have done the tour in Santa Barbara. There's the Arlington Theater, built around 1930 or something, and the extensive Wurlitzer, as I recall, Wurlitzer organ, and its mechanisms and its pipes and its whistles, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Well, it's just fascinating. Yeah. The organ's fascinating not only to musicians but also to mechanics and to engineers. It's the biggest and most complex musical instrument on Earth. And apart from the human voice, it's probably rather the oldest. And so it's had all these centuries to evolve and to develop into what it is. So it is fascinating on a lot of levels. And hey, I encourage that fascination. I've sent 3 of my graduates into organ building because they've been so fascinated by the whole thing.
And in my own defense, in my youth, I can't remember which Fisk it was, but I was at Cal Arts, and one of the Fisk kids, how he paid rent was he ran around town, ran around Seattle tuning organs, and I ran along beside him 2 or 3 times just to try and wrap my head around it. But you basically have to go to I wanted to say nunnery, but to a retreat for 17 years to figure out how this mechanism, as you described it.
It's all been learned by trade. It's all been learned on the job for most people. For a time there, it was possible to earn a degree in organ building for a time at the University of Oklahoma. That program is no more. Tragically, I'm sorry to say, but we're going back to learning it on the job. Learning the trade, but people are still doing that. I'm glad to see that.
And also about organ departments at universities. I'm sure that has been in decline over the years, or not?
Well, how's that going? It really has. The larger programs are still going strong. They still have upwards of 18 or so students per professor. My program has done fairly well over the years. We, to be here in this far northwest corner of North Carolina, we still attract, I still attract an organ major, at least one every year. My lowest number has been 4, and my highest number has been 10. in my 16 years here,
Mm-hmm.
and so they keep coming. But it depends on so many factors. It depends on what the kids grew up with, or what
Exactly.
fascinates them, or what they'd like to do. If they'd like to go into church work or church music, and they happen to be an organ major, then of course, then I would be their teacher as well. But um, it just depends on what the kids were brought up on these days.
I do not wish to become depressed. I'm going to tell you, because I am old school. I'm
Yeah,
71 going on 72. My training was,
right,
straight laced as a conductor,
right.
and I'm delighted to say I have seen the light, which is I'm running into brilliant young musicians
Uh,
who can sit down and play popular music
oh yes,
and switch and are masters at their instruments. So I think
right,
they're okay. This new crowd are okay.
right.
You mentioned a little earlier about that the music on this CD were your choices were because they're your favorites. Is there anything else there about how you decided to order the program? You know what I
Um,
mean about organizing sounds or tonalities or piece after piece?
right,
I'm just curious.
right. Of course, the Harwood Sonata is kind of the centerpiece of the CD, even though it's the final piece on the CD. Um,
It's the grand finale of the
it
CD.
really
It's
is,
huge.
and quite a grand finale it is. Um, the other pieces I'm looking at it here. That's why I'm looking
Yeah,
aside.
sure, sure.
But I have loved those Parry chorales for years. The Charles Hubert Hastings Parry chorales, and of course he wrote two books full of them. And I had never grouped them together like this, and I thought, well, that would be a very nice set. So I just chose them randomly from among his collection. They're not really designed to be played as a group anyway, and so I was able to excerpt my favorites from that. The Frank
I wondered.
Bridge,
Yeah, I
yeah,
wondered.
yeah. I had been playing those Frank Bridge pieces for a number of years, and the middle movement of that, the Adagio, is probably the most played of his organ music. But those other two movements are so wonderful as well, particularly that first movement with how rhapsodic it is. And when you think that Frank Bridge was the bridge between Stanford and Benjamin Britten,
Interesting.
then it just makes these pieces that much more poignant. I also knew that the organ I was recording on is nice and big. It's got plenty of stops to choose from, and it was going to handle these pieces quite symphonically without anything sticking out. Everything is going to be nice and smooth and grand and broad and English, if you will, despite it being an American product. Um, the Healy Willen chorales, I had played those for years. There are a number of those that I'd played, and actually we recorded two or three other Willen chorales that didn't make it onto the CD because there wasn't room. If you
In
look
this
at the
case,
time,
just so everybody knows, you have chosen two chorale preludes
yeah, just two
of
for Healy
Williams.
Willen, but
Yeah.
we couldn't fit any others in because the total timing of this disc is 78 minutes and 58 seconds, and CDs hold only 80 minutes. So
It's a miracle you pulled it off.
we had to stop.
Nice
And then
choices too.
of course the Basil Harwood Sonata. And oddly enough, I've never performed that Harwood Sonata. This recording was its debut under my fingers. Uh,
Not bad.
so,
It's a beast. It sounds like
but
a beast.
the curious thing is that most of these scores, the Rowley score, the Harwood score, and to some extent the Parry and Willen scores, they're all old and brittle. I inherited them from a mentor who had them since about the 1960s or so, and so but they held up. Long enough for this recording. I have since ordered fresh copies so that they don't just completely disintegrate. But they're those old soft paper brittle scores in your
They
filing cabinet,
disintegrate. They just
and you
plain
just
fall
you
apart.
you find a little treasure in there, and it's just so wonderful, and you have to drag it out of oblivion and get it out into the public because it's just wonderful music.
Which I want to, and I do want to linger on the Basil Harwood just a bit longer for those very reasons. This is again to remind everybody the Sonata Number 1, C sharp minor, Opus 5, from 1886. And boy, oh boy, he was looking into the peaking at least
Oh
into
yeah,
the 20th
oh yeah,
century.
yeah.
But also, it is just just fabulous, all three movements. And I think I asked you before we recorded, we agreed that this is maybe his most famous organ piece. Stop me if I get the story wrong.
Yes.
But we also, I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, agree that this is not very often performed, maybe.
Correct.
Correct. So therefore, you have done another great service, because this is a beauty of an organ
Yeah.
sonata.
Yeah, I hope so. I've never heard this piece in performance. I think I've seen it on a program or two, from a distance, but I've never been present when it was performed. Harwood, as the liner notes say, Harwood took a lot of his cues from Mendelssohn. He loved Mendelssohn. I don't think he was ever old enough to have met Mendelssohn, and I don't think he ever did. Harwood was born he was born long after Mendelssohn died.
1859,
yeah. And so, but he adored the music of Mendelssohn, and you can really hear that in the second movement.
Yeah, I was going to say in the Andante in particular. You mentioned that in your
notes. But as I prepared that movement, I thought, mercy, did he plagiarize this? And of course, not that plagiarism was a thing back then, but it sounds so much like Mendelssohn. But I'm quite sure that was deliberate. I don't think that's accidental at all.
A kind of homage, even, maybe. Subtle homage.
Right.
And then there's a massive fugue. Fascinating, complex, incredible fugue in the last movement, the Maestoso fugue. You want to tell me, that last movement is knock you right out of your seats kind of thing. The spectacular coda, it just keeps coming at you. Right. Sequences that mount and then decline and then come back. And it's a living, breathing sonata for that living, breathing, wonderful instrument. It's just a beauty. So thank you for helping us. As I said, I have several, couple thousand organists on my database. I probably in the professional organ world, everybody knows this Basil Harwood piece, but if they don't, I need them to pay attention. It's a beauty.
Very good.
Listen, I'm going to walk back a little bit. Actually, let me see if I forgot anything. We've talked a little bit about organizing. The program is always so fascinating. How that the decisions you have to make, and you've made it clear that these are some of your most favorite pieces. But I also liked the way the CD, perhaps intentionally, perhaps not, allows, I guess I thought for a moment you really were aiming this at church organists, to give them some interesting repertoire. Why not?
I hadn't thought of that. I really hadn't.
Because for example, the sonata is difficult.
Right.
But as we discussed, Alec Rowley's piece is wonderful for church organists to put together. And likewise, I mean, the programming, I think as I heard, it gets more difficult as the CD progresses in terms of technical magic and other things. But what do you think? Anything? The chorales, these wonderful chorales.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. I mean, most of this would be perfectly useful in church, and I have played a great number of these for church and in church. We have to remember that a lot of our British composers knew the church. A lot of them were choir boys in the church, and so it makes sense that they would compose in that style, whether or not they intended their music to be used in church exclusively. Obviously, the Harwood Sonata is a concert piece, so that connection is always present with our British composers. And hey, let's face it, most of the organ concerts are going to be performed in a church somewhere or another, and so that connection is always present. But I had not thought of that on this CD. That's an interesting point.
I hope not that. Inconsequential, and I'm glad that I got something right there.
It might have been subconscious, and I'm, as I look at it again, I'm perfectly happy to call it conscious now. So that's
good. We can salute each other on that one. But for example, C. Hubert H. Perry. I know his string quartets. He's a really major composer, major British composer. But I suppose I have, but was not aware of his organ writing. And so these two chorale preludes are wonderful, especially the Savant's "Oh God, Our Help." I loved that second prelude.
Oh, it's enormous. Yeah.
And is it also accessible maybe to church organists in terms of difficulty? What do you run into on that one? Do you remember?
That one's kind of tricky. That one's kind of difficult. It's so beautiful. And actually, I've managed to make it work for church only by cutting out that big cadenza towards the end. And I hope he doesn't mind.
Have you
but
had any knocking on the woodwork from?
no, I haven't heard
Okay,
anything.
okay, so
So,
far so good. All right.
but yeah, yeah. But and of course, the tune is there.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I say, it's a little buried in the texture, but it's there. And other than that, it's just wonderful rhapsodic, tonal music that is faithful to the traditions that these guys were taught.
And I was thinking of the Frank Bridge as I was listening to it, three pieces, an andante moderato, an adagio, an E major adagio, mellow, meditative, gorgeous, and an allegro con spirito, and B flat major, which is really a nice key to be spirited in.
Right.
But also in my experience, Frank Bridge, he is a very well-known British composer, but I just had not heard this aspect of his compositional media, and they're so beautiful. And as we have said, if you're a Brit, you're going to be involved in church music in some way, shape, or form in terms of your youth or your training and so on. Yep. Let's see what else. Let's see what I've. I did triple quadruple cross the Basil Harwood. That is a beauty. I mean, I'll spend some time talking about that one when I get down to writing this review. Anything else? Let's have a look. We've talked about Perry and Alec Rowley. I mean, what really has me on the Rowley is I may even be able to play it. What do you think?
Yes, definitely.
as a rather bad conducting pianist, and what I mean by that is not a criticism at all. I'm saying this is like, as we've discussed, church organists can play, and I believe he even mentioned that his purpose was to write this kind of music.
Pushing the notes down of this rally piece is the easy part. Registering it on a beast of an organ like this is something else, and that's where the fun comes in. And I will say that's where a lot of the artistry comes in. And there are a lot of organists out there who are truly artists at using the organ to get some sounds across and to get some to get these ensembles and to get these sounds work together just right. So there's truly some artistic work being done. So I had fun making this piece speak its mind on this organ, and I hope that I hope that the listener can hear the smoothness of the organ, and I hope that I won't get in the way of letting the organ speak its mind as well. With all of this music.
Okay, so the amateur in me, in terms of organ specialization, wants you to tell us all a little bit more about about registration. This thing about registration. Okay, how's that? And how you make those choices? I see all those stops, and
yes.
And I believe when you meant smooth, you meant without some kind of little awkward pause while I hear thump 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 thump.
Listen. Well, the thumping is a different sound, and it's kind of a beautiful sound, particularly to those of us who love the vintage. So, I love listening to the consoles, make all their squeaks and pops and so forth. The British music tends to be a little on the full side, as opposed to being on the bright, screechy side, as it were. If we'd like to compare it to, say, an orchestra, then the British organ has lots and lots of violas and cellos, and it's got just enough flutes and piccolos and trumpets and trombones to fill everything out. But there's a certain body to that sound that doesn't necessarily exist in just anywhere. Now, the French do very well at getting a lot of body to that sound. American organ building tended to favor kind of the higher pitches, and some of my colleagues would even go so far as to say that a lot of organs in this country are screechy and screaming and so forth. And but that makes an organ like this, which was also an American product, stand out that much more, because it has embraced that fullness of sound as well as that upper icing on the tonal cake, as it were. It's got it all. So this organ is very rich in what we call the 8-foot stops, which are the stops that speak at standard pitch, as opposed to some of the other stops that speak an octave higher, 2 octaves higher, and farther. So this organ also has a lot of rich firepower in its reeds, in its trumpets, its oboe imitations, and clarinet imitations, and English horn imitation stops, etc. So that is kind of it's a wonderful American equivalent of the English cathedral organ sound.
You know what that is? Excuse me, that is not entirely over my head, in that, in a way, we're speaking about in national characteristics. Even English orchestras are rich and full.
Right.
Okay, and American orchestras are bright and clean and clean. You know, there's this interesting comparison. And now let me talk about the bottom sound. And that with the instrument in Texas. Tell me about that, because it's and by the way, congratulations for fabulous sound engineering.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I was there, and the floor rumbled. Okay.
Yes, indeed. Listen, those guys who captured all my recordings are the best.
Very nice.
The best.
Very nice, yeah.
They can't be more than, I don't think either of them is 40 yet. But Ryan Edwards and Shannon Smith have just done a fantastic job of capturing the sounds of these organs with this technology. The low end of this organ is one of the better ones. And hey, let's face it, a lot of our American churches, a lot of our American rooms are acoustically pretty lacking. And so for an organ to get in there and provide all that low bass response that we're looking for out of an organ is saying something. Now, this organ resides in a splendid acoustical space, so that's not an issue. But I believe one particular stop that may have appealed to you is the 16-foot Ophicleide, which is the big trombone, if you will, in the pedal department, which actually plays an octave lower. And so, by the end of the Harwood Sonata, we're on low C sharp, which is turns out it's a C sharp lower than the lowest C sharp on the piano. So it's down there. And my producer put it so beautifully. I'll find his Facebook post one of these days. But he said that stop takes the sound of that organ and grounds it into the earth and does not let go.
Beautifully put.
Yes.
It's and very, very impressive sound.
So this organ has a wonderful foundation to it, which keeps it grounded, and it doesn't let it float and get high pitched and the shoulders come up, but it just stays nice and solid. Again, with that roundness and fullness of sound. It's got plenty of the upper work. It's all there, but it's got enough of the fullness to help support that as well. It's a very complete instrument, and it's big, but it's in a big room, and that's okay.
and also, you remind me, I think I've seen, I'm not sure, but because I've reviewed some other performances, that church is very, very often used for recordings, I believe, in Texas. I think I've seen that building, and it is huge. It's a huge space.
That I don't know. It's enormous. It's it's kind of what we call modern Gothic, or maybe American Gothic, but it is pointed, and it's built entirely of bricks. And I would say that the ceiling is probably 90 feet from the floor to the peak of the ceiling.
So it is a cathedral.
It's enormous. It's enormous. And it's, it's a Baptist church. It's First Baptist Church of Longview, Texas. But it was built back in the day when the oil was flowing freely in that part of the world. And a lot of the oil money was flowing freely in that part of the world. And so they were willing to go grand. And so they went grand with the architecture, and then they went and got the busiest organ builder in the land, and stocked the room.
And by the way, congratulations and good for them at First Baptist Church in Longview, Texas, for having the money and the vision.
Right. And by the time we got there in 2017, I believe it was, they were most gracious hosts. And these days the use of the organ has fallen off in a lot of churches. And First Baptist is no exception, but the ministers of music at the church were so gracious. They know what that organ represents historically, musically. They know what it represents to organ lovers, aficionados, experts, anyone else. And so they were all too happy to say, oh, by all means, come and record. And so, to my knowledge, this is the first recording on this organ.
Oh, really? Wow, fantastic.
There may have been a recording made soon after its inauguration, but I haven't found it. Virgil Fox, the great flamboyant American organist, dedicated that organ in 1951. But to my knowledge,
and they've been repairing the broken windows ever since, probably, right?
Well, yeah. Well, no, it's fine. Oh, listen, the building can take it. The building can handle it.
What have we missed or forgotten? You hinted about a project coming up, but before we move, or that might be coming up, before I dare ask you if you're going to tell us anything about it, any last thoughts on American classic English?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think that we've hit it all.
Okay, now tell us about Vitor.
I hope that title will,
now it makes sense.
Check it out.
Yeah. And now I feel like kind of a fool because, of course, as you said, every organist knew what you were going at, and I thought, America.
The organist will figure it out.
Gave me a little brain twist there for a second. So, tell us, do I dare mention Vitor?
Oh, of course. That is a 7-volume series. I'm careful not to call it a set because we're not going to market them as a set. So they're actually coming out in 7 separate volumes. 3 of them are out. So American Classic Vitor. Again, there's that double entendre, the American Classic organ and also my classic traditional readings of the music that based on research into Vitor, I think that it's the kind of approach that I hope he would appreciate. I think, I suppose the quintessential example is that I don't take his famous toccata as fast as everybody else does. I actually take it as fast as he marked it, which really makes an interesting statement.
And not only that, but it's absolutely correct. In other words, thank you. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
There is in our reasons and purposes for why composers make a
So really, the Longview recording is one of a greater series of our attempts to bring little recorded Aeolian Skinners into more listening ears. One thing led to another. So we recorded 2 Vitor symphonies on the big Aeolian Skinner at St. Mark's Cathedral in Shreveport, Louisiana. And that was such a success. We said, well, let's go to Longview and record something. And okay, we'll make it all English. Well, by the time we finished Longview, we said, we have to keep doing something with these Aeolian Skinners. And so my producer said, well, why don't you just learn the other Vitor symphonies? I said,
just like that.
Okay. And so
I'm sure everybody knows that Vitor's symphonies for organ are the greatest, wildest, craziest, difficult, virtuosic masterpieces.
At the time, it was the most virtuosic organ music written. So he wrote 10 symphonies. And so we recorded 2 on 5 different Aeolian Skinners. So we recorded 2 of them at First Presbyterian Houston, which is one of my favorites. Again, we recorded 2, of course, at St. Mark's Cathedral, Shreveport. We recorded 2 on the landmark 1959 Aeolian Skinner at the Community of Christ International Headquarters in Independence, Missouri. The Community of Christ was formerly the reorganized Latter-day Saints. It was an enormous organ up there, so we recorded 2 there. We recorded 2 on the beautiful E.M. Skinner organ, which was the forerunner of Aeolian Skinner, at First Presbyterian, Wilmington, North Carolina. And then we recorded 2 others at Providence United Methodist Church in Charlotte, which houses the organ that used to be in the Kennedy Center in Washington. So these are all Aeolian Skinner / E.M. Skinners. And with the exception of the auditorium organ in Independence, Missouri, none of them had been recorded much, if at all. And so, again, we're very pleased to be bringing these organs. What's interesting is that you would expect people to record the complete Vitor somewhere in France. And in fact, everyone who has recorded the complete Vitor has done so in France. But when we discovered how well Shreveport spoke Vitor,
beautifully put,
we said, let's try this somewhere else. And organ after organ, everyone we worked on spoke these pieces so very well. It really has been eye-opening and ear-opening, if you will. And we've been so pleased that it worked as well as it did. We didn't expect to find any lemons, but we really didn't expect these organs to be so conducive to what Vitor was doing. Now, I have to say, I was the organist at First Presbyterian in Houston for 7 years, and I played on that Aeolian Skinner for 7 years. But when I sat back down a couple years ago to record these Vitor symphonies, it was a completely different organ. And the more I worked with it and re-registered, I thought, this organ is completely unfamiliar to me, but it was doing so well with Vitor. And then when I went back and played that organ again for a normal Sunday morning service, just to come and say hello, it was a completely different organ again, and it was back to being its usual church service playing self. But it's amazing what Vitor's music can do to an organ that's playing it.
Now I understand you, I think.
Yeah, and then for these organs to step up to that challenge of playing those works has really been remarkable. So we are just overjoyed. We are delighted at how well all that has turned out. So four more volumes to come.
And if I may say so, it speaks to something very American.
Yes.
In that when we set our minds to become experts at something, I hope I don't run myself into a hole here, but the point is American technology really has always been superb. And now what you, I think, are confirming is that these American organs are magnificent instruments.
Well, yes, these are. Yeah, tonally, they have stepped up to the challenge more than we thought. Yeah. They speak good French. Let's say that. Let's say that.
Very well put.
Longview spoke beautiful English, and these others have spoke beautiful French. So.
That's beautiful, wonderfully put, very amusing. I think we're done. What do you say, Shel? I'm going to wind it up and kind of remind everybody that I'm speaking with organist Dr. Joby Bell, and we're talking about this really wonderful 2019 Centaur Records CD release, American Classic English Music by Alec Rowley, C. Hubert H. Perry, Frank Bridge, Haley Willen, and Basil Harwood. You can't get any more solidly English than that, the names alone, let alone the music. It's just a wonderful, gorgeous recording. And as we have discussed, the organ at the church in Texas, remind me again?
First Baptist, Longview, Texas.
First Baptist, Longview, Texas. Make notes for all of you organists out there for your next travels. You probably all know about it, you know.
And actually, I should be quick to point out that only 8 miles away is another landmark Aeolian Skinner at First Presbyterian in Kilgore, Texas. We have to mention that, but I didn't record on that organ, and so we've been talking about
But it's on the list, apparently.
But it's another landmark organ. So if you are an organist or an organ lover, go treat your ears and hear those two organs.
And something else very interesting, as I mentioned earlier, I'm taking a small group of wonderful music-loving people, including some organists, to Portugal this summer. Mm-hmm. But now I understand most of them are from Alabama. From from the South, which you described earlier as really a tradition of church music in America. Mm-hmm. So now that all makes sense. Okay.
Oh, good.
All right. Listen, Joby, thank you very much for giving me some time, and everybody pay attention as I put this. I'm going to put this interview up in the next few days. 3 or 4 days. I've got a little stack on here that I'm having to catch up on, and as I've probably mentioned to everybody, people browse the performingartsreview.net website. They graze, and because I get all the stuff from the backside, and they move around. It's about $1,200 a month on average. That's pretty good, I think, for a classical music station.
Yeah, that's great.
Site. So we want to get you up and get that interview up, and then I'll follow with the written review of the CD.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Joby, many
Thank
thanks.
you.
Right on.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now.